Hi everybody. Just wanted to let you know some of what I had going on at the moment. I am currently working on a Winchester Model 12. This is a repair and preservation. I'm not going to do a restore on this. It's not terribly bad off and it's got some character, so we're just going to leave it be. And I found plenty of videos online that were talking about assembly and disassembly of these, and the one thing I did not find was a video talking about the assembly and disassembly on the trigger assembly. Now what we've got here is one that was broken inside of that trigger assembly. Mark Novak did a good video on how to take this thing apart and put it back together, and he did not cover this because he didn't have to take it apart, and if you don't have to, I recommend highly that you don't. The only problem is that I had was this component here. This is the lever that lets you lock and unlock the action, and if you can see right there, there are two channels cut into it, and those two channels are for springs. They're at two different angles and they sit like this, and they each go on the up and down above this on that side of the hammer. Well, one of them was broken off. You can see that right here. We've got two of them. I went ahead and took the old one out because there was no reason to not change both of them at the same time, since I was in there anyway. These are the replacements. I'm going to go ahead and change this screw and the trigger spring while I was in there, but I wanted to show how to take this apart if you ever have to, which I recommend you don't if you don't have to, but considering that that spring was broke on here, I really didn't have any other option but to replace that at that point, and this whole thing has to come apart to get that out, because that is the first piece that they put in, and it goes in all the way over here on this side of the assembly, and they put that in, and then they work back to this side in order to get all of that took care of. This is the first component, and then the trigger, and then the hammer, and then the lifter lever is last. So I wanted to give you a walkthrough on how to take this apart. Your lifter assembly originally sits just like this right here, and it will have a screw right in there that is reverse thread. So make sure you don't booger that one up because it is awfully short. It is a bushing headed screw and it is reverse thread. So once you've got that out, that's step number one. Now this comes loose and this is out of the way. And there's the screw for it. Your next job is going to be getting the pin out for the hammer. To do that, you have to compress the hammer spring. You can see that little teeny tiny hole in the end of the hammer strut. That goes right in here, and when you compress it, that will poke through into this recess. And while you've got that compressed, you take your sophisticated tool of a paper clip and you push that through that hole. That will compress it. Then you pull the trigger. That will release the tension on the hammer, and it will let you push the hammer pin out to the right hand side of the trigger assembly. Everything is going to be going to the right. You start over here by removing this. That comes out first. Next is the hammer, which sits right here in this slot. This is the pin for it. You drift it from left to right, and in order to do that, you have to go through that tiny little hole right there. This is about all the clearance you're going to be able to get when it's lifted into its proper position, and you will be using a 1/8 inch punch for this, and it will go right through there. And all you don't have to punch it all the way out, you just have to punch it out enough to clear the hammer. Then the hammer will come out. Underneath the hammer you will find the trigger and sear, which just sit right down in there, just like that. And they just lift right up out. Now there is a spring underneath that, so putting it back together, there's the detent that spring is going to go into. It sits right there inside of that assembly. So once you've got that done, this is out. The hammer spring and hammer and strut are out. The trigger is out, and the hammer for the trigger is, or the spring for the trigger mechanism is out. Now you are to the point where you can get, oh, excuse me, I missed a step. Right here, the trigger is retained through that hole by this second pin right here. That also comes out left to right, your 1/8 inch punch, right through that access hole right there. So once you've got that cleared, then you'll have one more screw to get this out. You access it through this hole right here. You have to get a special screwdriver for this. This is a 5/32, and then I had to grind down the tip even more to be able to get it to fit that screw, because it was a little too thick. But you just file that down. You will need a ignition point file for this project. That will slip right through that hole and let you access the screw that retains this. Before you can remove that screw, however, you will have to grind the end of it, because it is staked in place. So take your Dremel out and a burr and grind those two tiny little stake dimples loose. Once you do that, you'll be able to pull that screw out. That screw is also a bushing that is the pivot for that arm. Once you get that out, then you'll have this loose. These two springs that sit in there in the V format are also staked in place, and you will need your ignition point file, which happens to be exactly the same width as these springs, to clear the stakes out of that channel so that you can get your old springs out and your new springs in. There are two little recesses there. One is blind and one is not, and those let the hooks go into it and lock. And that will get this out and replace that spring. Everything else is, for assembly, is putting this back in reverse order. I couldn't find any information on how to take this trigger assembly apart, so I figured I would document it while I had it apart in case anyone else ever has to go into this. I did not take the safety mechanism out. That is a separate deal on its own. It's not broken. I ain't messing with it. But in any case, oh, the other spring, this one right here, this is for this lever. Forgot to mention that. There's a tiny little hole right there, and that spring sits inside of that. I think Mark covers that in his video. It sits just like this, interfaces there, and rides in that channel there. So that's it. That's all there is to it. All right. I appreciate y'all watching. Have a good day.